During the 19th century, Venice was a magnet for artists. In the course of the century, the focus of artistic interest changed. Until the last quarter of the century, artists were chiefly preoccupied with Venice as an architectural ensemble, an interest greatly stimulated by the success of John Ruskin's Stones of Venice, published in the early 1850s. And they were drawn by the distinctive qualities of atmosphere and light to be found in the city. Towards the end of the century, another artistic focus was increasingly evident, on the people of Venice, the Venetians themselves, the gondoliers, water carriers, stall-holders, laundresses, the working men and women of the city, particularly the women, with their colourful clothing and visual attractions, with the city relegated to a background setting, a stage with its scenery, upon which these somewhat idealized actors performed the roles the artists created for them. In 1888, the British journal The Graphic observed, "Venice is now an even more favoured sojourning ground for artists than it was some years ago, say during the days of the Austrian occupation. Quite a colony of painters, among whom there are a good many English and Americans, have taken up their permanent abode there, and it may be observed that whereas the older generation of artists chiefly busied themselves with transferring to the canvas Venetian buildings, whose picturesqueness is so enhanced by the intermingling of ocean and architecture, the modern painters, such as Van Hanen, Eugène de Blaas, and Henry Woods, seek inspiration in the human life which pervades the streets and quays of the Queen of the Adriatic." The three artists mentioned here followed the lead of the native Venetian artist Giacomo Favretto in depicting scenes of the ordinary life of the city rather than vistas of the city's architecture or great monuments. Austrian painter Cecil Van Hanen, English painter Henry Woods, and the Austrian-Italian painter who is the subject of this film, Eugène de Blaas, who was also known, reflecting his mixed origins, as Eugen von Blaas and Eugenio Blaas. This is his self-portrait from 1898, in which he looks rather grim, and certainly nothing like the kind of artist who would base his career on playful, colourful, sunlit fantasies of carefree Venetian life and beautiful Venetian women. Eugène de Blaas was born to an Italian mother in Italy, in Albano, just outside Rome, in 1843. His father, and also teacher, Karl, was a notable Austrian portraitist and history painter who was a professor at the Venice Academy. Eugène, after training in Venice, spent the majority of his career there, where he also found his artistic inspiration. He died in Venice in 1931. This is one of Eugène de Blaas's paintings, usually known in English under the title The Curious, painted in 1897. The picture is a very moderate size, about 1.5 meters tall, and is in a 4:2 proportion, half as wide as it is tall. As with all de Blaas's work, it would have been painted in the studio, using models and possibly mannequins and photographs. De Blaas was not a plein-air painter, but a member of the academic tradition, producing highly finished canvases in the controlled environment of the studio. Here are two of the beautiful young Venetian women in their highly coloured clothing that are seen again and again in de Blaas's works. They are using a ladder to observe something on the other side of a high wall. The uppermost lady peers over the wall, her body stretched upwards, and her face a study in surprise, amusement, and attentive interest. Presumably the scene over the wall is one of flirtation or amorous intrigue. Poised on her toes, she gracefully extends one arm back and downwards, hand held out flat with palm inverted, to gesture at her companion, who, like us, cannot see over the wall, to keep quiet, and to wait just a minute before she can have her turn at the top of the ladder. This is something de Blaas is very good at, and which is found in many genre paintings, the gift of telling just enough of a story, of providing sufficient clues for the onlooker to put together a narrative, but a narrative that is necessarily incomplete, creating a teasing appeal to the imagination. The viewer is as preoccupied by what is not visible as he or she is by what is visible. Such pictures are often criticized as superficial, yet their very success indicates their ability to create a world, or at least a scenario, of some depth, and to draw their viewers into it. Part of that success rests on the painter's mastery of detail. The ability of a picture like this to provide a sense of fantasy and a feeling of escapism is founded, paradoxically, on its realism. This painting is full of the careful and precise depiction of material reality, the texture of the old and time-worn brick wall, and the way the wood has cracked and split around the nearest of the nails that secures the lowest rung of the ladder, the layers of crumbling plaster on the upper part of the wall, and the way the foliage tumbles over the masonry of the top, the treatment of different fabrics, catching or reflecting the light, hanging in folds that suggest their differing weights and thicknesses, the slight wrinkling of the uppermost woman's stockings at the ankles as she stands on tiptoe to peer over the wall, the glint of light on her companion's gold earring, and the glimpse of her arm through the openwork lace of her sleeve. These two women were two of de Blaas's regular models, and appear in many of his paintings. Despite the popularity of his work, Eugène de Blaas's art was not always positively received by the critics, even in countries such as Britain, in which he frequently exhibited, and always found a ready market for his canvases. His reuse of the same models was one point of criticism. The Graphic commented in 1886 that Mr. Eugène de Blaas would do well to employ a greater variety of models, and he was also criticized for being slightly monotonous, and painting new works with the old materials. This latter claim is literally true. That is the way de Blaas worked, and this painting provides a good example of it. De Blaas had already used the idea we see here in 1897's The Curious in this picture, Curiosity, painted in 1891. This work found a large audience through being reproduced as a colour print in Pears magazine for Christmas 1892. He did not merely recycle the idea, however. The 1897 version is a stronger composition, with the positioning of the second woman at the foot of the ladder rather than upon it, providing a more balanced and engaging composition and more variety of posture, as well as a more interesting interaction between the two women. His work was formulaic, but the formula succeeded partly through variation, within clear limits. De Blaas's art is not the kind of art you will find much talked about in books of art history, and certainly is not paid much attention by academic art historians. That is despite the fact that, in terms of the output of professional fine artists, paintings like these, and the widely circulated prints based on them, were probably the form of fine art that most people were most familiar with, across a range of social classes and professional backgrounds. It is of the kind normally described as genre art, everyday scenes of everyday life, although here the idealized Venetian setting gives these supposedly everyday scenes a quality of escapism. This, of course, contributed to their popularity in parts of northern Europe that were haunted by a certain dream of Italy, and perhaps particularly of Venice, that dreamlike city of temptation and flirtation.